We'll assume that the audio is good. So welcome everybody. Welcome to the campus safety webinar this evening. We're going to go through a couple of things tonight. Should be a really good discussion. Looking forward to it. This is a fairly dense presentation and discussion. Obviously, it is being recorded. If you are registered, then you will be able to get a copy of the replay. We will send out to you after the webinar is over. So quick introductions for myself. Brent Earlywine. I'm the owner and lead instructor for the Pittsburgh Bujinkan Dojo. My background, I've been in martial arts now for about 36 years and counting. I am also what's known as a personal protective measures instructor. That is a certification that took me about 7 years to obtain in the PPM curriculum. Those are the challenge coins you see there at the top of the slide. Is really focused on the no nonsense, practical self-defense kind of skill sets. I am also certified in the Alice active shooter methodology from a defensive perspective. And then I'm also certified as a NRA refused to be a victim instructor as well. So all of that experience is really put together to talk about the subject matter this evening, which is campus safety. So I've got a couple of college age kids myself. They are headed back to campus. And we thought from a timing perspective that this was a really good opportunity to talk through this subject matter and give you some tools, some strategies, risk mitigation concepts before you head back, or if you've got children of your own that are headed back to college, good information to arm themselves with before they go back to school. So I want to start with what our agenda is this evening. So we're going to spend some time really starting with understanding what is violence. There are a couple of different types, and it's a really great baseline to understand types of violence, who perpetrates them and why. That will actually go into your mitigation strategies to try to mitigate any risks that you might have as an individual or your kids might have as individuals. We'll go through a reality check. We'll talk about the awareness levels. There's kind of a framework and coding that helps you understand what that looks like. We'll spend some time on intuition and what's known as the gift of fear. And then we'll get into actually predicting violent behavior. What are the road signs? What kind of behaviors are going to predict when violent behavior might occur? And we'll spend some time, obviously, about establishing boundaries and thresholds, and then we'll go through some of the practical strategies on how to keep yourself safe. And then I have some really good resources for everybody, both hotlines to websites to books that we recommend. So we'll wrap up with that and questions at the end of the evening. So I want to start with really kind of the definition on what is violence. This is a really deep subject matter. So this is going to be a short overview, but it's critical to understand. Essentially, you can take all types of violence that we might see and experience in our lives, and we'll fall into one of two buckets. You'll see either social violence or asocial violence. And I'll start on the one side with social violence. This is typically what most of the violence is that we see in our society is going to be made up of. Social violence. This is typically things like, two guys getting into some sort of argument or shouting match in a bar, and they start throwing, phrases at one another about their respective mothers. That's what's known as the monkey dance. And this is really about social status. This is really about, winning a war of words. Unfortunately, it can and does escalate into real physical harm, up to and including people losing their lives, unfortunately. But this is the stuff you see on the news all the time. You see things like road rage. You see people getting into altercations at sporting events and bars, what have you. That's going to fall directly into the social violence kind of bucket or category. The other thing that you'll see is what's known as an educational beatdown. And this is where somebody might have violated some sort of cultural rule or unspoken rule where they've done something that really they shouldn't be doing, either from a status perspective or in a particular culture. And then the violence is really to reinforce the rules and to make sure that they understand that they've overstepped a line somewhere, and they're going to reinforce where those lines should stay and where they should be maintained. The good news about social violence, when you look at it, is at the end of the day, it really typically comes with instructions. And a little bit of a joke there at the bottom, shut your mouth or I'll kick your rear end. a very clear direction on stop doing what you're doing or there's going to be consequences for it. So what that means is that gives you an off ramp to stop the impending violence in some way, shape, or form. It's very difficult sometimes to stop or slow down the monkey dance or the social violence because our emotions get the best of us. We participate in that back and forth, and then it escalates and gets out of control. But this is typically a type of violence that you'll see that comes with instructions. Typically, there's really good off-ramps, ways to de-escalate and not participate. And in our live classes and seminars, we typically teach strategies and ways to de-escalate, as well as how to kind of control your own emotions and when that adrenaline dump happens, to not participate and not escalate and not keep driving that kind of interaction forward, if you will. On the other side of that coin is what would be known as asocial violence. And this is usually what we think of in the back of our heads as soon as somebody says a violent encounter of some kind has taken place, where it's predatory or predation, where somebody is really, you'll think of movies or TV shows or books with the serial killer. That's asocial violence, where they're more focused on the actual process of the crime and the violence, and not necessarily the individual that it's enacted against or it's perpetrated against. In general, good news is it's fairly rare in Western societies. It does happen. And there are lots of examples of asocial violence that shows up all around us on a regular basis. But in general, as a normal course of events, it's relatively rare, which is great. The other two that I have listed here is survival panic. This is extreme fear. This is where kind of the emotional brain is taken over. If you think of like a drowning victim, where they're in complete panic mode and somebody's trying to save them and they end up dragging the other person down under the water, if you will. That's a good example of an asocial kind of violence. It's not intended to try to harm the other person, but the emotions get the best of that individual. And you'll see that survival mode kick in. But really what we're talking about tonight is the predation piece of asocial. We're not going to be spending too much time on social violence, although our risk mitigation strategies will certainly apply there as well. But what we're trying to accomplish is how do we keep ourselves safe and how do we keep our children safe when they go to college. So I did say good news. If you take a look at the crime stats, we in the Western world and in particular the United States, we have actually seen a multi-decade decline in violent crime over almost 30 years. The high point there right around 1990, and that would be really at the height of some of the epidemics from a drug perspective. You saw violent crime at a fairly high rate, a little over 600 incidences per 100,000 people in the United States. Right now, this is from the FBI statistics, and the last report that was available is in 2020. You see this almost straight line decline, a couple of bumps along the road, and a little bit of an increase in the last couple of years. But statistically, this is still a fantastic story where the rate of violent crime in the United States has gone down. On the bottom, I have some charts that really are showing the on-campus crime. So what you'll see is similar trends. Total crime in general from 2009 to 2019, following a similar kind of decline year after year after year. On the bottom, you'll see the sex offenses on an upward trend that is counterintuitive to the other trends that are heading in the downward fashion. Some of this may be attributed to, or they think it's attributed to, better reporting and people more willing to come forward maybe than they were in the past. So it's good news, bad news inside of that. Bad news, there is certainly still sexual offenses and crimes that are taking place. Good news is people are being more comfortable in coming forward and talking about it, reporting it, prosecuting it. So that's probably why we saw the uptick over that course of about 10 years as people got more comfortable in coming forward, sharing their stories and prosecuting any of the incidences that might occur to them. If you'll notice, right about 2018, it peaks and then starts to drop again. So with the increase in reporting, then it seems to now start to track with the overall decline in Western society. So here's my reality check for you. So there's a couple of things that we usually talk about when we're live together with seminars. One of them is really around mentality, and this is what I want to spend the time on here. Is that whenever I talk to individuals, especially young adults, there's a couple of attitudes that typically come out. One of them is this idea of the Disneyland mentality. This shows up a lot when people go on vacation. They think that because they're on vacation, they can really, relax, do anything they want. They're on vacation. Nobody's going to bother them. Well, unfortunately, the outside world and reality doesn't change or go away because we happen to be on vacation. This mentality also happens to show up when kids first go to college. They're excited. They're meeting new people. Maybe they're going to some parties. They're starting to establish new friendships, new routines, new things, new activities. And they're really not thinking about the practical realities of what could be taking place or what their risks might be. So really, this is reinforcing the idea that, even though you're going into this new environment, new activities, new friends, you still have to be diligent for your own personal safety. The other attitude that we see a fair amount is the idea of, hey, I can do anything I want. I can go anywhere I want, and I'm going to be free of consequences. It's a free country. I can do this, and how dare anybody tell me otherwise or have consequences. The short answer there is technically you're right. You can go anywhere you want and do anything you want, but that does not mean that you're free from the consequences of those decisions. And it's a subtle mind shift, but it's a really important mind shift to understand that even though it may not be your fault, which is the next point, it could become your problem, which means that there's something that you're going to have to deal with. Violence perpetrated against you is never your fault. However, it could still be your problem that you have to figure out how to defend yourself, protect yourself, get out of that situation, and try to get to safety and/or certainly protect yourself when and where it comes to that. The other mindset that we see in Western world, and again, this is a good news kind of mentality, is that in general, we think of violence as it's repugnant, it's icky, like, there's no reason to perpetrate violence against another person. The sad part about that, or the bad news part about that, is not everybody else in society has the same view or perspective or opinion on violence. So I have a quote there at the bottom: don't assume that because you find violence repugnant that so does everybody else. And the last quote there is, why do people use violence to get what they want? Because unfortunately violence works, or violent tactics work. So there is certain individuals, personalities that will use violence to get what they want. Because they know that violence, or the threat of violence, is actually very effective, especially in the Western world, where it's not something that we're used to on a daily basis in our social interactions in the day-to-day lives that we have. So I want to shift to a couple of other really important concepts. The first one is the idea of awareness. And we talk about utilizing a framework. Cooper's color codes is a really easy way to understand different awareness levels. And if you look at the bottom right there on the slide, you'll see what's the point of being afraid of a zombie apocalypse when you're already a zombie. So the point being that, you see all these young adults walking with their faces buried in their electronic devices, their cell phones, social media, what have you. They're not really paying attention to what's going on around them. So if you look at the color codes, the easy way to really think about this is it's not uncommon that we walk around in our daily lives in what would be known as white from a color code awareness level. And really that's, you're not paying attention to the outside world, you're distracted, you have your nose in your phone, you're reading a book, you're completely focused on something else, and you're not paying attention to the environment physically that's around you and details of what's happening. The next step on that curve is what would be known as condition yellow. And the best way to think about this is something is kind of piqued your interest. You're not even sure what it is. Something's off. You heard a sound. Something doesn't fit. You're not even sure what it is. This is really, now you're just starting to pay attention in some way, shape, or form. You haven't identified a threat. You haven't done anything about it. This is literally, you're just now back in the moment and you're paying attention. The next step here would be what's known as condition orange. And condition orange is now you have identified something very specific. Somebody's approaching you, somebody's yelling at you, somebody is closing into personal space. Something has happened, and now you are very much focused on that particular specific alert and potential threat. You still haven't done anything about it. You still have to evaluate. You still have to assess. You got to make some decisions. What's an appropriate response? What's really going on? Has it moved hands on? Whatever the case might be. But you've gone from complete unawareness in condition white, condition yellow, your ears have perked up, you're paying attention, something's going on, not sure what it is, to condition orange. Now you've identified something in particular that you are focused on. And then condition red would be something is actually happening. Somebody is grabbed you, somebody is hit you in some way, something has happened, and you are now engaged with another individual, unfortunately, in probably some sort of violent encounter, whatever that might look like. And then what you'll notice is this almost loops back on itself. You'll see condition black. Condition black is almost the same as condition white, but usually it's a definition on what is a high stress encounter, where you are completely oblivious of anything else that's going on because you are completely consumed in whatever's happening, or stress levels are so high that your senses are no longer processing what's around you in any sort of practical way. So we like the Cooper's color codes. It's just a really good way to understand awareness, the world around you. And look, we go into white and yellow back and forth all day long. Usually I'll use the example of when you're driving. If you've been driving for a while, it's not uncommon that, you know, you leave work, you end up at home, you were thinking about work, and you weren't really paying attention to the driving itself. You were kind of on autopilot a little bit. So that's bouncing back and forth between maybe white and yellow. Yellow is because somebody hit their brake lights in front of you. Now you're paying attention for a second or two, and then you just kind of go back to autopilot. If you think about it, that kind of stuff happens in your daily life on a regular basis. I will also tell you before we move on that trying to maintain a high awareness level and paying attention to everything around you all the time, it's exhausting. So your brain is not designed to operate that way. It'll still kind of absorb all the senses and all the information that's coming in. But by design, your awareness levels will continue to drop back down by default, because otherwise trying to maintain a high level of awareness is really difficult and really exhausting to do as an individual and as a human. I want to shift to what we would label as the gift of fear. If you're not familiar with it, it's the name of a book by a gentleman by the name of Gavin de Becker. I have a bibliography here at the end of the presentation. Fantastic book, definitely worth it to purchase and read. Get it on Kindle, whatever the case may be, worth your time. Essentially, what Gavin talks about is really about your intuition. And when he's talking about the gift of fear, when you have that fear that's triggered and you're not even sure why, it's a gift. And here's what we mean by that. So your intuition is the result of all of your senses collecting information, processing it. And typically what happens is your brain really prunes all that information. There's so much coming in all the time through all your senses that you can't look at everything. You can't process everything consciously. Your brain's just kind of filtering through it, and it filters out really what it thinks is not important in this particular moment in time. But that doesn't mean that the brain has stopped looking at that information or really kind of processing that information. So the intuition are things that are being called up from your brain processing all that info that's coming in, and then it's telling you something. So intuition, it's always in response to something. So messengers of intuition I have on the right-hand side. Those nagging feelings, you get a persistent thought that just won't go away. Maybe there's a level of anxiety. You got some sort of hesitation in a particular scenario or situation. You've got some level of apprehension. Something's bugging you. You've got some level of fear. You've got a gut feeling about somebody or something. Those are all messengers of intuition. Intuition, I'm sorry. And the idea is that intuition has your best interests at heart. It's you, after all. It's your brain, it's your intuition, and it's trying to tell you something. It's trying to get you to pay attention. And it's trying to get you to go from white, unaware, to condition yellow, to go, hey, there's something going on. You probably should pay attention and figure out what it is, and then what do you want to do about it? Um, the good news is that intuition ultimately gives you time, and time equals safety. So if you get that nagging thought, it's your brain telling you, okay, stop, pause, take a look, evaluate, assess, decide what you're going to do about it. Not sure what it is, but maybe you should really pay attention for a couple of seconds and then figure out what you want to do about it. If it's nothing, move on, no problem. Um, I would call out a couple other messengers of intuition that are interesting that people will usually dismiss. One of them being humor, and you can think of that as dark humor. So, example might be, hey, there's no way this guy I just met at the bar is a serial killer, right? So you're telling yourself these dark humor kind of things in the back of your head. It's another thing to really pay attention to because it's a messenger of intuition that's trying to get you to pay attention, look at signals, look at signs, and then make some decisions on what you might want to do about it. Curiosity and wonder can also be a messenger of intuition, like, oh, what is that? I've never seen that before. That's not something I've ever heard somebody say before or do before. It's different. So we're creatures of definitely being interested and attracted to and paying attention to things that don't fit normal patterns. So anything that's outside of a normal pattern generates wonder or curiosity. Probably also worthwhile to stop, pause, take a look at, and then assess whether that's something you need to deal with from a threat perspective or not. So I want to shift to predicting violent behavior. So intuition is really just listening to yourself, listening to your intuition, and then trying to make some sense of it. Prediction is really all about trying to solve that puzzle. Once you've paid attention, once you've seen something, heard something, experienced something that's out of the norm, what are you going to do about it? So this is now we're paying attention. But I want to start with, where does violence usually occur? So there's a couple of things here that I would call out. Violence of all types will happen where people go to get their minds altered. So the easy way to think about this is people that are gathered together at the local bar, everybody's doing shots, they're drinking beers, they're altering their mind, they're in altered states in some way, they're unfortunately maybe getting drunk. So violence has a tendency to spontaneously erupt through that social kind of violence. Everybody, your mother, my mother, bumping chests, and suddenly we go to hands-on, we're throwing fists, and we're into a fight, somebody gets hurt. Violence also happens where young men gather in groups. And I call this out specifically because, unfortunately, younger men, so let's say from about the age of about 16 to mid to late 20s, there is this inherent thing genetically that men are usually looking to establish status versus other men. So anytime you see large groups of men, it's not uncommon that you'll see violence break out. So the photo down there on the bottom left is a soccer match or a football match. So all you have to do is watch the news, look at YouTube. You'll certainly see examples of my team versus your team, or just groups will suddenly, a couple of beers in, and they start throwing fists again. And that's directly related to the third point, which is violence happens where territories are in dispute. And that's real or imagined. So the imagined version is my football team versus your football team, my soccer team versus your soccer team. Or it could be a real territory, my side of town versus your side of town, or my country versus your country. So lots of examples where violence happens, where the territories are in dispute, and it's something for all parties to argue against and then decide that they're going to perpetrate violence on the other people to maintain their territories or maintain their boundaries. The other thing that I call out here that's critically important is predatory violence, the asocial violence that we talked about earlier. It happens in lonely places, and it happens in transitional places. Predatory violence typically doesn't like witnesses. So this is inside a dorm room. Transitory locations might be the dark alley, the not well lit parking lot or parking garage, the back hallway, things where there are not a lot of crowds, not a lot of lights, certainly not a lot of witnesses. So violence typically, or the predatory violence in particular, usually happens in lonely places. And then the last piece here that we always add is violence happens in time. So when there's a threat of violence, it ends up being a gift because it gives you time, and time equals safety because it gives you an opportunity to de-escalate, remove yourself from the situation, move to a safer location, go to a group of individuals where there's safety in numbers, whatever the case may be. When violence is happening in or on a timeline, that extra time gives you some additional margin of safety. So let's talk about 5 stages of violent crime. So this is hands-on violent crime, sexual violent crime, whatever the type of predation might be. It's all going to follow a very similar pattern. So if you take a look at intent, and I have phrases here, you can still prevent violence. This is really all talking about the time and the opportunity to remove yourself from the situation, try to de-escalate, what have you. Intent is where somebody is looking to be a predator and do some sort of act. They haven't done anything yet. You probably aren't aware of it, but at the end of the day, there is still a gap of time because it hasn't moved to any sort of hands-on. The next piece there is what we would label as the interview. I'll go through the interview in more detail here in a second or two. But essentially, they're trying to determine whether you're a good victim or not. What kind of personality traits do you have? Are you going to maintain your boundaries? If you say no, or you're going to keep saying no, they'll test those fences, if you will. But essentially, there is an interview to see if you're a good victim. This is an interview you want to fail, by the way. And then as it moves closer to the actual attack itself, they're going to go through some positioning, and we'll go through what that looks like. But essentially, they're going to close the range. They want to be able to maybe come from your blind side. They, might use tactics and strategies to get you to assume they mean no harm when in fact that they do. And then, of course, the next stage is going to be the attack itself, and whatever that looks like. That's where it's hands-on. That's where the violence is being predated upon you, and you have to deal with it. That's the reaction. The last piece there, and again, that we're not going to spend too much time there tonight, but there are consequences. So there is a thought leader that we've trained with and talked to all the time that makes a statement basically that you have 2 problems. One problem is your self-defense doesn't work. Your second problem is your self-defense does work. And what he means by that is the legalities of you've defended yourself, now what? So you may be at risk of basically being prosecuted for a crime unless you can articulate why they should let you get away with your violent responses in return versus somebody that was being violent to you first. So that's a whole nother discussion as well. But when we talk about the stages of violent crime, I add that 6th from a consequences perspective because it's important to understand. So let's talk about, you'll hear these as PINs or pre-incident indicators. So I was talking about the interview, and again, I'm going to go through the interview in a little more detail on the next slide. Context is a really good one. So is the behavior of that other individual, does it fit the context of where you are and what you're doing? So if it's not contextually in alignment, behavior seems odd, they're doing and saying things that just don't fit whatever the environment or the scenario or what is happening at that time, it certainly can be a red flag or a pre-incident indicator. You'll hear the term forced teaming. This is a strategy that violent criminals will use consciously all the time, where they'll suddenly start using the term we, even if you don't have a relationship with them. You don't know this individual, complete stranger, and all of a sudden they're weaving in the word we all the time. So they're forcing or trying to force you into the idea that we're in this together, we're a team, when in reality you have no relationship with that other individual. Another one that's really popular, unfortunately, with criminals would be what's known as loan sharking. So this is the idea of, hey, I'm going to buy you a free drink. At the end of the day, I didn't ask you to buy me a free drink. I'm not interested in a free drink. I don't know who you are. So I'm not interested in that unsolicited offer, but it's a way to try to establish either physical proximity or trying to establish some sort of short-term relationship to get in and get closer. Another one that shows up a lot is oversharing of details. So all this extra unneeded detail, telling a story, trying to explain something away, maybe trying to use some sort of cover story. And the intent there is They can't help themselves because it's high stress for them as well if they're trying to do some sort of violent act or predation. The human nature is it'll start oversharing levels of detail. So it's another really good indicator, or at least your ears should perk up, and you should basically, again, pause, assess, and look at it through a realistic lens. Charm, unsolicited promises. So again, if it's something that's unsolicited, you didn't ask for it, that doesn't mean you need to respond positively or participate in it. You didn't ask for it. They offered it to you. Great, thanks, but no thanks. Overly effusive charms and compliments. So, wow, you look really pretty tonight. I love that blouse, or whatever the case may be. But compliments that, again, are unsolicited are trying to establish some level of a relationship with you. Another interesting one, this usually shows up with folks that are younger, would be typecasting. And what I mean by that is almost like a challenge, like, I bet you would never do that, or, I bet you're always a good girl, or you're always a good boy. There's no way that, you'd ever do underage drinking. I know that, your parents would disapprove. And the challenge is trying to get you to basically go, oh yeah, let me show you, I'll do that. So the idea is that they're using typecasting to get you to react a specific way. It's creating a script and trying to get you to follow that script. The big one here is discounting the word no. So we'll talk about it again later, but essentially no is a complete sentence. There is a skill in establishing boundaries. There's also a skill in maintaining boundaries. So somebody offers you an unsolicited drink, short answer, you don't have to explain yourself. It could just simply be no, could be no, thank you. That's it. If they continue to try to talk to you, try to convince you, what they're doing is they're testing your boundary to see if you're going to maintain it. You put up a fence, and now they're going to check that fence to see if it's really a no, or you're going to back up, cave in, and accept, or move your fence back a little bit further, so to speak. So they're going to continue to test it. And if they do that, that's a huge red flag. And then the last one here is you can use this in any interaction. It's called the rule of opposites. And again, it's really kind of trying to frame the context of what's happening. And an easy one here is if maybe it seems like somebody is standing too close, for example, the rule of opposite would be, well, what would be a normal in the context we're in? What's the normal distance or range somebody should be standing next to me? If we're in a really loud bar with loud music, standing close is probably normal. If we're outside in a quiet area, standing within, 1.5 feet is probably way too close. So it's a great way and a quick rule of thumb to try to evaluate somebody's behavior through the rule of opposites, to see what would be normal behavior, and are they doing the normal behavior, close to normal, or is it something that's completely opposite of what would be considered normal in that context? So let's talk about the interview. Really, a violent criminal is looking to pick a victim on purpose with a couple of characteristics. So first off, I'll be very, very clear. Criminals pick their victims based on behaviors, not on appearance. So this is not, they're going to pick somebody from a sexual assault perspective based on what they're wearing. That is absolutely not true. They will, however, pick somebody that they determine is going to be a good victim. Again, we talked about this is an interview that you want to fail. And the idea is they are going to have behaviors and questions and interactions to try to determine if you're a weak kind of personality, whether you're going to be somebody who's going to fight back, whether somebody is going to put up that fight. They're really looking for a low risk kind of target because they don't want to put themselves in harm's way. They want to get away with whatever they're trying to attempt. And essentially, they're trying to interview potential victims to figure out who's going to be a really good victim, i.e. who's going to let me do what I'm going to do, and who's going to let me get away with it, and who is not going to fight back. So some of the ways they'll do that is, are you going to engage in conversation, or is it going to be a quick, thanks but no thanks, and move on, no interaction, don't try to get into justification. No is a complete sentence. Can you be manipulated by guilt? This is one you'll see with panhandlers a lot. You've all seen them. I've seen them on the street corners. They ask you for, some money, some change. And as soon as you say no, then they immediately, you're driving a nice car. You look like you got nice clothes. You can afford to give me $1. What are you doing? You're a piece of junk. And really all they're doing is they're trying to see if you can be manipulated by guilt, and they're trying to change your behavior based on our societal scripts, which is, I don't want to be perceived as, a not nice person. Therefore, I'm going to give him what he's asking for. I'm going to give him that $1, $5, whatever. But it is a manipulation, and we need to be really clear about that. And they're using it to interview you to see if you're a good victim. The other one is, are you going to yield to somebody's will? And really, this is somebody's trying to control your conduct, somebody's trying to control your behavior. And these can be really subtle, but it's really important that somebody is trying to manipulate you in some way, shape, or form. And then the question becomes, are you going to cave, and are you going to allow them to manipulate you? Or are you going to maintain your own boundaries and threshold? And then we said before, you may establish a boundary. You may say no, you may say no thanks. But will you maintain it if they press it and they test the fence? Do you really mean no? Hey, I just want to buy you that drink. What's wrong with accepting a free drink from a nice guy, right? So that's nothing more than testing that fence and testing to see if you really mean no. So again, here, victim selection is really around, if it's appearance of being an easy target. And there's body language that shows up. If you're walking down the street and you got your head buried in your phone, head down, you're not looking around you, you in theory could be a really good victim because you don't have an awareness level, you're not paying attention to your environment, or your behaviors or the results of the interview shows that you're not somebody that's going to fight back. You're not somebody that's going to have a strong personality and maintain those fences and boundaries. So they're really trying to evaluate you from a victim selection perspective. And then, of course, accessibility, the settings, the circumstance, or the context all come into play. If these types of interactions make sense, are they normal interactions? Not everybody's a criminal. Not everybody's trying to harm you. It could be certainly innocent kind of interaction. So you really have to take that into consideration and understand what's the context of the interactions you're having. If somebody's in a bar, somebody standing close to you and or offering you that first drink, probably odds are not trying to do you harm. If they continue to try to offer you the drink and press when you say no and exhibit some of these behaviors, then that's a different story, right? So it's really trying to understand that context. Very, very important. Now let's go to pre-attack indicators. So this is right before it physically goes hands-on. So there is body language that takes place, high stress levels. Believe it or not, the criminal typically is going to be under stress as well. And they will do certain things that really are going to show you whether they're just about to go hands-on. One is going to be range development. This is getting closer to you. This is angling to try to get a better attack position, trying to maneuver you into some sort of blind corner so you don't have anywhere to go, or limit your options of routes of escape. So that range development is really important, and somewhere, somehow, you should have kind of a gut reaction to, what is going on here? This person's closer than they really should be. I don't feel comfortable. Back to those messengers of intuition. Location of hands. If it's going to include weapons, typically the hands will be around the waistline. And that's simply because as human beings, that's where we store weapons. So if somebody has a knife on them, if they have a gun on them, if they have a stick, if they have something that they're going to use as a force magnification, more than likely it's stored in and around their waistline. It's in pockets, hidden behind their back. So the location of where the hands are is really important. One of our thought leader mentors, why do we pay attention to where the hands are? Because the hands can kill you, either by themselves or with a weapon that they might be holding. The other thing that happens a lot is blading or coiling. This is the idea that they're really kind of turning their body a little bit to one side, trying to hide the attack, hide the weapon. That is a big one that you'll see. Go look at YouTube videos of fights. You will see that blading happening all the time right before the initial punch, the sucker punch takes place, because they're trying to put their body into the right physical position to surprise you with attack. A witness check is another one. They're looking around. They're trying to see if anybody is in the area, anybody see what's going on, anybody looking. They don't want any witnesses, so they're going to check for witnesses. Again, this could be unconscious on their part, but it is a huge red flag. And then you'll see from a physical perspective, things like lowering the jaw. So our neck area is very vulnerable. So if somebody's about to attack you, they're trying to protect their own vulnerable areas as well. So you'll see this tuck of the jaw, and that's again usually subconscious, where they're trying to protect their own vulnerable spots from damage that they may take in the encounter or the altercation. And then the other thing that you'll see is self-calming or self-soothing. The term petting, they're essentially kind of touching or rubbing themselves in some way, shape, or form, and that's really just a way they're trying to calm their own nerves. Because again, they're stressed as well. And these are ways that body language just can't help but communicate. It's gonna come out in some way physically. And usually you'll see, kind of stroking the back of their hands or their arms, maybe petting their own hair, rubbing their face. These are all kind of nervous tics, if you will, and they're trying to soothe themselves through that physical touch. And then the weapons check, if they have a weapon, they may pat the pocket that has the knife in it before they actually pull it out. They may double check they've got a knife tucked in or a gun tucked in a waistband. They're just checking to make sure it's there. So if you see them kind of patting areas where they might have weapons stored, more than likely it's a weapons check before they draw it, before they deploy it. This isn't about they've already taken it out and you can see it. This is before they do it. This is before the attack takes place. And then if we look at the 4 basic truths of violent assault, here's the other bad news. It's closer than you think. So typically the perpetrator is closing that range, closing the distance. They're doing that on purpose. They want to surprise you. It's faster than you think. You can kind of think of a blitzkrieg kind of attack. It's a flurry of assault. They're trying to overwhelm your defenses in the shortest amount of time to stack the odds in their favor. To try to not get you to respond or fight back, or be incapacitated before you're able to respond or fight back. Typically, it's very unexpected and happens a lot more suddenly than you think. Again, if you think of their goal as the perpetrator is get in, disable your defenses, perpetrate the violence, and try not to take their own damage in return and not have you fight back in some way, shape, or form. They're going to design their interaction around those goals. And then there's more power than you think there is. Typically, as humans, as soon as we start to receive incoming damage, there's a violent attack, we freeze to some extent. And that freeze can last anywhere from microseconds to minutes, depending on what is going on, the level of violence. Some folks actually get stuck in the freeze and never get out of it. But the power, again, is designed to overwhelm you and take advantage of that freeze that we know that most people are going to have whenever they experience unexpected violence in some way, shape, or form. So another way to say this is assaults happen fast, they happen hard, they happen close, and they happen with surprise. And it is by design by the violent perpetrator that's the way it takes place. So let's talk about risk mitigation strategies. So this is kind of the heart. We talked about what is violence, the different types. We've talked about pre-incident indicators. We've talked about intuition, or the messengers of intuition. We've talked about what violent attacks actually look like. How do we get in front of that, and how do we mitigate some of our risks in the hopes that it never goes hands-on, and we're never the victim of violence in any way, shape, or form? So we'll go back with, the first one is awareness is really your biggest tool in your toolbox. Paying attention, looking around, assessing what's happening. If you have some sort of nagging thought or feeling in the back of your head, pay attention to it, look around, try to figure out what triggered that thought. What's bugging you. Listen to those voices in your head, even if it's dark humor. If there's something that's triggered intuition, it's worth you paying attention to. Now, that doesn't mean you have to do anything about it, but you do need to stop, look, listen, pay attention, and then decide consciously, yes, it's a threat, I got to do something, or no, it's not, and move on with your day. Be aware of transition areas. So we talk about this a bunch. We said violence happens in lonely places. So anywhere it's transitory, or transition area, low light, small crowds, no crowds, places where you might be able to be kind of cornered or on your own, the parking garage, the back hallway, the dark alley, the places where your friends aren't there and you're on your own. So either avoid that as much as humanly possible, or potentially there's safety in numbers. So traveling in groups, especially after hours, or if you're in unfamiliar territory, physically. Maybe you've gone to another neighborhood you've never been to. Maybe you've gone to a bar off campus. Whatever that case may be, really try to limit the transition areas, because that is where violent crime can take place. Let somebody know where you're going. Send a text or a DM to your best friend, your dorm roommate, to friends, family, whomever. Let them know where you're going to be. Let them know when you're expected to be home. Let them know when you are home. Just take that extra step and let somebody know where you're at, what's going on, and what your schedule is, so somebody can assist or pay attention. If you notice, there's an image here of the call box. The other good news in the last probably 20, 30 years is almost every single college campus has invested very heavily in the emergency call boxes. The rule, and I think it's encoded in law, is essentially you need to be able to see a call box from any other call box. So they are all over your campuses. Make sure you understand where they are, how they operate. Essentially, they're very simple and straightforward. You hit a button, you're instantly connected with either 911 or most likely the campus security, campus safety officers. It automatically shares which call box you're calling from. So just know where they're at, know how they operate. They're a great tool in the toolbox. If you're off campus, obviously they don't exist. You have to rely on other means of communication. A big one over here on the right is don't trust somebody just because they're an acquaintance. I'm not saying somebody that's a friend, don't trust them, but somebody maybe you just met, somebody that you don't know very well. The sad stat is that most sexual assaults are perpetrated by somebody the victim knows. Probably doesn't know well, but they're an acquaintance of some kind. So they've been identified as a victim. Maybe they've been stalked. So don't trust somebody just because you happen to know their name and you happen to have some interactions with them. Unless you really know who they are, you probably need to be cautious on where and how you interact with them on your own. Know your limits. Look, you're moving to college. I would like to tell you that nobody's going to consume alcohol until you're over 21 and you're more mature. I know that's not reality. It's not practical. So if you're going to do that, then know your own limits. Unfortunately, in college, we have a tendency to learn our limits and test our limits. But if you're going to be somewhere and you're going to be consuming alcohol, consume it in moderation. Or if you feel that you've gone past your limits, make sure you're with somebody. Somebody can help you get to safety, get home. And know that you haven't exceeded your limits and now started to expose yourself to a risk that you really are able to mitigate. The other good news, I would say, again, in the last 10, 20 years, the policies and the physical security on campus has increased in a really great way. One is typically you have to go past a security desk. You have to have badges to get into the buildings. All the dorms typically now will lock automatically behind you. But that doesn't mean that people still don't, maybe prop open a door, leave it open. Folks are coming in and out of dorm rooms, they're studying together, what have you. But keep your dorm room closed, keep it locked. It will certainly mitigate risk from just physical burglary, somebody's taking your stuff, to exposing you to risks you really don't need to expose yourself to. And then social media. Look, we're all on social media. We're sharing stuff left and right, but I would recommend you don't broadcast your schedule. If somebody is watching you, stalking you in some way, shape, or form, they're going to pay attention to any information you share on social media, and that includes what your schedule might be. Where are you going to be? When are you going to be there? Because they may use that as a way to target you as an individual, to figure out, they're going to be somewhere where there's no crowds. They're going to be by themselves. They're going to be by themselves for several hours in a row, whatever that case may be. So limit what you're sharing on social media when it comes to schedule and where and what you're doing. After the fact, it's fine. Before the fact is usually where this shows up. I want to caution everybody from what we would label as talisman thinking. I have people that ask me all the time, one of them being, should I buy my son or daughter, mace or pepper spray? Should I get them a taser? Should I get them a rape whistle? I will tell you that I would say no to all of those for multiple reasons. The first reason, especially if you look at mace or pepper spray or tasers for that matter, they may run you afoul of local laws. You will also hear the term that colleges would be what's known as a non-permissive environment. So they take a pretty dim view on what they would label as dangerous weapons, and pepper spray or mace could be in that category. Taser certainly would fall into that category. The other reason that I would say is most of these things in and of themselves are either ineffective. Most pepper sprays actually are not very effective. If it's actual bear spray, and it has to do with the ingredients, you may actually not stop the attacker or incapacitate the attacker. You may just make them angrier because it's really not that strong. Or worse, if it's outdoors, you may spray and it could come back and incapacitate you. So I'm not a big fan of mace or pepper spray. Things that are loud, like whistles, make noise. People will ignore car alarms, they'll ignore noises, they won't respond to it. So I don't know how effective those really are at the end of the day. One of the things that we do recommend, and it's almost a guarantee that you can carry this anywhere, including really stringent non-permissive environments, college campuses, post offices, airports, banks, is a flashlight. A really strong, you can hear the term tactical flashlight. I'm always careful with that. But a strong flashlight can be incapacitating for a short period of time when shined into somebody's eyes. And usually we're looking for very specific descriptions or features on a flashlight that make it worth your time to purchase, carry, and use. Usually there's going to be some sort of trigger button on the back of it, so you don't necessarily turn it on and then turn it off. You actually just hit the button briefly and it will flash, go on and go off. So it makes it very easy to utilize and apply. But just like anything, you really have to have it on you. It doesn't do you any good if it's back in the dorm room or it's stuffed in a purse where you can't get to it, in your glove box in your car. It has to be on your person. And then, oh, by the way, the other thing here is anything that you might carry, you have to practice with it. And you have to practice with it under stress to see if you can deploy it, use it, and use it effectively. Because again, if you remember the 5 stages of violent assault and what a violent attack actually looks like, it's going to happen really fast. It's going to be overwhelming, and it's going to be a surprise. So, you don't want to try to be fumbling around to try to deploy something to protect yourself. It's almost better to have nothing at all and rely on your own hands and body and feet to defend yourself versus a tool or an object of some kind. So that's why we use the term talisman. You can't just say, hey, I own the thing, therefore I'm safe. That's absolutely not true. The thing may not be appropriate, mace, pepper spray. 2, you may not be able to carry it or not allowed to, or it's illegal like a taser. Or 3, it could be a really good answer like a tactical flashlight. But if you don't know how to deploy it and do it under stress, it might not do you any good either. So don't get caught in that trap. It's an easy answer, but it's not a good answer. So let's talk about boundaries and thresholds. So this is really kind of wrapping up from a mindset perspective. And I'll read this off to you. It's better to avoid than run, not be in that situation to begin with. It's better to run than de-escalate. If you have the opportunity to get to safety and completely extract yourself, there's nothing wrong with run jitsu, right? Run to safety, keep yourself safe. It's better to de-escalate than fight. I don't want to go hands-on with somebody because I could take damage. The odds are pretty good, unfortunately. So I'd much rather try to talk my way out of it, especially if it's social violence and it's nothing more than 2 people kind of yelling about each other's mother. Don't participate. Try to de-escalate. Apologize. Eat your words. It's much better to do that than end up in a physical altercation. But if it really comes down to it, it's better to fight than suffer permanent harm. So if it goes hands-on and somebody's really trying to hurt you, it is a predation kind of, sexual assault, for example, it is much better to fight with everything that you're worth than to just suffer permanent harm or all the way up to and including loss of life. So that is literally the scale that we want you to have in your head. It's better to avoid than run, better to run than de-escalate, better to de-escalate than fight, and better to fight than suffer permanent harm. So the other mindset here is you got to pre-decide what your response might be whenever you might run into a violent encounter of some kind. And when we say thresholds, this is really what's your go button, what's going to be the line that's going to get crossed that if that line is crossed or even approached, you know you are going to respond in some way, shape, or form, whether that response is run or fight or do something. But you're pre-deciding before anything ever happens, before you ever have an altercation. What are your thresholds? What are your, non-negotiable kind of lines and boundaries and thresholds that you're going to protect and maintain? So what's worth fighting for, and what are they? I will tell you that physical items can be replaced. If somebody is a resource predator and they're just after your purse, your wallet, your watch, your cash, your cell phone, give it to them. Insurance will replace it, and even if they don't, it's going to be a minor inconvenience versus physical harm or loss of life. It's not worth fighting over physical items. Hand it over, move on, don't worry about it. But if it's something else, hey, get in the back of the car and I'm going to drive you somewhere else. That would be an example of a boundary or a threshold that I am not going to cross. Nothing good happens in secondary locations. So two very different scenarios, but I'm pre-deciding ahead of time. God forbid if I'm ever presented with that decision, that if somebody's, hey, I'm going to drag you, put you into the back of my car, you know what, I'm going to fight for my life because I know, or I'm absolutely convinced nothing good's going to happen if I get in the back of that car and they take me somewhere else. This is an intellectual exercise. It's also an emotional exercise, but you're pre-deciding what your response is going to be, because in the moment, if something happens, if you haven't kind of thought through this and you haven't pre-decided what are your non-negotiables, you won't learn new skills and you won't be able to make good decisions in the moment, under stress, under attack, when you're taking damage. You'll most likely freeze. So this is one of the ways you can break that freeze, is by giving your brain answers before, God forbid, anything ever happens that's of this kind of scenario. You don't need to drive yourself crazy with it, but really think about what your values are, what your thresholds and boundaries are, and then make your decisions on what's acceptable, not acceptable, and what you're going to do about it. And then this is something that I think is critically important, and that is you got to give yourself permission. So in Western society, again, we really don't like violence, and that means that we really don't want to perpetrate it ourselves. We consider ourselves good people. We think violence is icky. We think violence is only done by bad people. Therefore, I'm not going to do violence, even if I'm receiving damage. I'm not going to do anything about it because I don't want to be that bad person. Believe it or not, that script is going on in the back of victims' heads. It happens all the time. You have permission to defend yourself. If you are taking damage and somebody's trying to hurt you, you can protect yourself and defend yourself. You have permission to be rude. No is a complete sentence. You do not have to justify your response. You do not have to explain it. You do not have to have a longer answer to whatever somebody asks you if it's unsolicited. For example, no is an answer, and that's all you have to say and move on with your life. You have permission to survive, and that means you can fight like hell. You have permission to fight dirty if it means your life. There are no rules when it comes to protecting yourself. If you need to do the icky, squishy stuff to protect yourself and get the other person to stop doing what they're doing, then you have permission to do that. You have permission to act, and you have permission to win. And the last piece here is you have permission to determine what winning is. So this is you deciding what you will do from your own behavior, your own responses, and the permission for yourself to do whatever you need to be safe, go home, and be with your loved ones. So I want to leave you with some resources. Excuse me. The big one I'd call out here for colleges, there's something that was passed, federal law several years ago, called the Clary Act, C-L-A-R-Y. If you search your own college or university and use the term Clary Act, it will take you right to the college or university's statistics on crime and security info, campus police, campus security, resources, the emergency call box locations, policies, procedures, you name it. So it's a wealth of information specific to your school. By federal law, they have to provide that information, and it's all typically freely available on the web. I suggest you go look at it. There are certainly other organizations here, websites, phone numbers, either for prevention or after you're a victim of a crime. for support, counseling, what have you. These are great resources, again, either funded with federal dollars or national organizations. These are some of the best that you have available to you. If you need them, take advantage of them. Go look at their websites. They also have great research information, great information on helping keep you safe. So it's a great set of resources to save and keep. Put them in your phone, add them as contacts, save the numbers. That's usually the best way to have it. Then you don't have to go looking for it after the fact. But some of these are really important. At the very least, do that for your own college campus safety and security officers and departments. Save those in your phones as soon as you get to college, even before you get to college. So again, if you are off campus, typically they can help respond there as well. If you're certainly on campus or you can't get to an emergency call box, you can call them on the phone. They will act like a 911 kind of service center. And then the last resource that we would put here, there are several thought leaders when it comes to real world violence. Three I have highlighted here. A bunch of great books. Gavin DeBecker, The Gift of Fear. This is the one that's talking about intuition. He also talks a lot about stalkers and how to deal with stalkers. Highly recommend his book. Can't actually recommend it enough. It's a fantastic read. Rory Miller. So you'll see things like conflict communication, facing violence, meditations on violence. This is really somebody that understands real world violence, what it looks like, who perpetrates it. Fantastic material and information. This may not seem like attractive information to read, but it is very enlightening and will give you a no BS kind of view on what it really looks like, not what we think it looks like in movies and TV. And then the other gentleman is Mark McYoung. Mark McYoung used to be a bad person and now is a good person in terms of, he helps victims, he testifies in court. And he has published a vast amount of work really on how criminal minds work. Recommend two of his books here, specifically around the concepts of what is self-defense, what's not self-defense, what are the consequences, and again, mitigation risk strategies. Totally worth your time. All right, so with that, I know we're almost at the hour, but just wanted to make sure that everybody had an opportunity to ask any questions that they might have. And while I'm waiting to see if anybody posts in the chat, I will send out the replay. It will have the presentation in a PDF format, and then of course the recording. You can share that recording with other individuals. I do think this is critical information for people to have, specifically as they go back to campus. So as we get to see 8:03, we're a couple minutes over. I want to say a sincere thank you. I wish everybody the best of luck on their college and university endeavors. Be safe, pay attention, and then of course, if there's anything we can do to help you along the way, please let us know. Thank you for your time, and we will talk to everybody soon. Thank you.